Chinese art traditions are one of the oldest continuous art traditions in the world. China, consisting mostly of simple pottery and sculptures, dates back 10,000 BC. This early period was followed by a series of dynasties, most of which lasted several hundred years. Through dynastic changes, political collapses, Mongol and Manchurian invasions, wars, and famines, Chinese artistic traditions were preserved by scholars and nobles and adopted by each successive dynasties. The art of each dynasty can be distinguished by its unique characteristics and developments. Different types of art in China develop according to the interest and patronage of each dynasty, as well as the whims of the regional rulers. Trade relation with its East Asian neighbors was also an important stimulus in the development of Chinese visual arts, notably pottery and lacquerwork. Today we will talk about Chinese painting, calligraphy, pottery, architecture, sculptures, and other fine or decorative art forms produced in China over the centuries.
Poetry has been a favorite literary genre for thousands of years. Poetry isn't taken very seriously in the West, especially in the last 200 years, but Chinese ancient poets are honored. The greatest poets are thought to have lived 1,000 years ago or more during the Tang, Shang, and Han dynastic eras. Du Fu, Li Bai, and Su Shi are considered among the best ancient poets, and there are 5 major kinds of major ancient poetic styles called Shi, Si, Gi, Pu, and Fu. 3 best ancient poets in China. Du Fu. Du Fu liked to write in structure form of poetry that was called Lu Shi, or regulated poetry. He is thought of as one of the greatest realist poets in China, because his poem reflects the hard reality of war, people dying next to rich rulers, and primitive rural life. Du Fu's famous couplet, "Behind the reading doors stink wine and meat, but upon the road die frozen men." Li Bai. Li Bai liked to write in a free-form poetry, and this kind of poetry was called gushi. Li Bai is described as a romantic poem. Sun Pu or Sushi. Sun Pu is called Sushi. He is regarded as a great poet of the Northern Song era. Because of political problems, he was banished and lived on a farm. It is thought that many of his best poems were written when he was banished. Here is the stanza he wrote. The moon rounds the red mansion, stoops to silk-pad doors, shines upon the sleepless. Bearing no grudge, why does the moon tend to be full when the people are apart? The very ancient poetry that was written 1,000 or more years ago was simpler and about common things like love, romance, and nature that people appreciate.
Calligraphy established itself as the most important ancient Chinese art from alongside painting, first coming to the fore during the Han Dynasty. Far more than mere writing, Good calligraphy exhibited an exquisite brush control and attention to composition, pero ang aktual na pamamaraan ay mahalaga rin ng may bilis at spontaneous strokes being the ideal. Ang brushwork ng calligraphy, philosophy at materials ay makaka-impluwensya sa mga estilo ng pagpipinta ng Chinese. The highly flexible brushes na ginagamit sa calligraphy ay ginawa mula sa buhok ng hayop or more rarely a feather na pinutol sa isang malapad na dulo at itinali sa isang hawakan ng kawayan o kahoy. Ang tinta na ginamit ay gawa mismo ng manunulat by rubbing a dried cake of animal or vegetable matter na may halong mineral at pandikit laban sa isang basang bato. There were 5 main scripts in ancient Chinese calligraphy. Una ay ang seal script. Ito ay isang formal na ginamit para sa mga seals at iba pang mga opisyal na dokumento because it has strokes ng pantay na kapal at mas kaunting direction changes. Pangalawa ay ang clerical script. Ang clerical script ay formal na script at nakalaan para sa pag-iingat ng record ng mga clerks at opisyal. Third is regular script. Ito ay ang karaniwang form para sa pagprint at nananatiling pinakakaraniwang ginagamit ngayon. Next, cursive script. Cursive script ay ang pinakapopular na pinagpipilian para sa masining na pagpapahayag. Lastly, drafting script, also called gross script. Dahil ito ang pinakamabilis na gumawa and wildest in that the artist stretch convention to its limits para ang ilang mga characters ay magiging mahirap kilalanin agad. Just like in any other art, the most gifted practitioners of calligraphy became famous for their work. The most revered of all Chinese calligraphers, as mentioned already, was Wang Xiji. He was a student of Lady Wei. His famous work is the Lanting Su and others. Lady Wei Xiao is a well-known calligrapher of Eastern Jin Dynasty. Her well-known works include famous concubine inscription and the inscription of Weishi Hainan. Wang Shanzi, son of Wang Xiji, was another celebrated calligrapher who produced such precise characters placed neatly into square boxes on his paper. Ang mga techniques at conventions ng pagsulat ay makaka-impluwensya sa pagpipinta. Another influence of calligraphy skills on painting ay ang kahalagahan na ibinigay sa composition and the use of blank space. Finally, calligraphy remains so important that it even appeared on paintings para ilarawan at ipaliwanag kung ano ang nakikita ng manonood. Ipahiwatig ang pamagat o itala ang lugar kung saan ito nilikha and the person it was intended for. Eventually, such notes and even poems become integral part of the overall composition, an inseparable part of the painting itself.
The art of Chinese painting is the oldest, continuous, artistic, and traditional in history. From highly colorful religious artwork to distinctive monochrome landscape. Ilan sa mga painting ng China ay ginawa to represent and reflect their life environment and life around them. And in doing so, have created an aesthetic which is truly unique to this land. Masterpiece of China spans 100 of years, including some rare work of art. Ang karakteristik ay may pagkakatula sa Chinese calligraphy, which is closely bundled up with the nature of the region. The basic na gamit nila dito ay ink, which is formed into short stick, hardened fine soot and glue, and rubbed inkstone with a little water. Their brush was made of hair of goat, deer, wool set in a sharp bamboo. Chinese painting is to enter into dialogue with the past. The act and unrolled score of living through an album provides a further physical connect to the work of the past and history.
Chinese folk art are artistic forms inherited from a regional or ethnic scene in China. Usually, there are some variations between provinces. Individual folk arts have a long history, and many traditions are still practiced today. Chinese folk art is the ancient forms of art that is originated in China. Some of these ancient art forms include jade carvings, performance art such as music with their respective instruments, and textile art such as basket weaving, paper art, and clothing. Chinese folk art is an important part of the country's extremely rich cultural and art heritage. Chinese folk art also won recognition and praise from experts both at home and abroad for its great variety, sincere rural content, rich flavor of life, distinctive local style, and artistic approaches of romanticism. Since ancient times, Chinese folk arts has been seeking to understand and present the lofty spirit of the Chinese nation. It has given expression to the indomitable moral and character of the Chinese people, shown in their constant efforts to open up new ways for development.
So Chinese folk art is an ancient forms of art that originated in China. Yeah. So some examples of these art forms are jade carvings, performances, and textile art. So, etc. etc. So, di-discuss natin yan. So, first is jade carvings. So, jade is a semi-rare green mineral. So, this mineral is prominently matatagpuan natin siya sa Chinese arts. Yan. So, jade carving were first carved into weapons. Like examples, yung swords, yan, ginagawang swords yan, yung jade, in Chinese, yan, jade carving. So, next is performances. So, one example of these performances is one of the oldest folk art is yung puppetry. So, puppeteers, gumagamit sila ng different kinds of puppets. One example of this is yung rod puppets, wire puppets, glove puppets, and marionettes. Yan. So, isa lang yan sa mga example ng puppets. And yung subject matter for this kind of art is children's stories and fables. So, yan. Isa lang yan naman sa mga example of performances sa Chinese art form. So, next is yung textile art. So, one example of this is yung Chinese knitting. Yan. It is decorative handicraft na nagsimula as a form of Chinese folk art. Yan. So, in Tang and Song dynasty, the art is referred as Chinese traditional decorative knots. Yeah. It creates decorative knot patterns. So, isa lang yan sa example ng textile art, yung Chinese knitting. Yan.
Chinese sculptures. When talking about sculptures, people will most likely think of the ancient Romanist architectural sculptures by the great Novi sculpture. Few are acquainted with the history of characteristic of Chinese sculpture. In fact, Chinese sculptural art, while differing greatly from its Western counterparts, has thrived in a long historical process of development in many aspects. Chinese sculptures have been sculpted delicate objects, such as figures, animals, plants, and landscapes, with a number of new kinds of raw materials, such as sand, coal, apart from the traditional bronze and jade. Many of the works have become precious artistics pearled in the treasure house of Chinese art. Relief are a form of sculpting where pictures are chiseled into the surface of brick or stone to create something that resembles a combination of both painting and relief. This particular art form was used in ancestral halls and tombs as architectural decorations, although most are found on brick walls and tombs. Ibig sabihin, mas ginagamit siya sa mga design ng mga libingan. Next, coal carrying or coal carving, which has existed for thousands of years but was only known by a few has-made conduct with its vitality. By peeling, digging, carving, and howling out this common element, turning into mythical scenes and fairy tale figures. Sand sculptures have turned the art of carving in sand into a new trend in many big cities, known as a modern art for only 20 years. Sun sculpting is a popular and recreational art capable of drawing widespread of attention from the public. Molding human figures and animals from clay or glutinous rice flour is a popular folk art in both urban and rural areas in China. Offering molded from butter or butter sculptures are central to spiritual development in Tibetan Buddhism. As a unique sculptural art in Tibetan culture, the art has an origin in Tibetan Bon religion and is considered one of the exotic flowers in the treasury of Tibetan art. So this offering molded from butter is more on religion, about religion. So that's all for Chinese sculpture.
Next is Chinese pottery o Chinese ceramics. Sabi dito, pottery is maybe the oldest artwork of human beings. People in Neolithic age, it is more than 8,000 years ago. They began mixing clay in water, then baking it until it held its shape. Ancient people attached the word pottery to their discovery and used it to create various vessels and tools to improve the quality of life. As time passed, the technique became more and more consummate, and different kinds of pottery appeared in different times in region. Ang nangunguna nga dyan ay ang Yangshan culture, 5,000 to 7,000 years ago. Sila ang unang nakagawa ng technique for painted ceramic wares. Next ay Kuyaaaaaaa culture and Longshan culture, 4,000 years ago, na kilala sa paggawa ng mga black ceramic wares. Then, during the Shang Dynasty, 16th to 11th century BC, bronze vessel grew into somewhat of a status symbol. Common people do still use traditional clay ceramic wares. And another fine example of beautifully crafted pottery is the tricolor glazed pottery of the Tang Dynasty. The pieces were created by adding various metals oxide and baking it at low temperature. The glazed pottery would appear to be lightly yellow, reddish brown, shamrock, or light green. Another choice pottery that won great reputation for hundreds of years is the purple clay pottery. It is well known for its mild color, condensed structure, high intensity, and fine particles.
In ancient China, the most commonly known fabric that's being used for clothing is silk. Silk is a thin but strong fiber that silkworms produce when they were making their cocoons. It can be woven into a very soft and smooth fabric. According to research, silk fabric was invented in ancient China and played an important role in their culture and economy for thousands of years. When it comes to making silk, the ancient Chinese bred special moths to produce the quality silk they wanted. The legend has it that the process of making silk was first invented by the wife of the Yellow Emperor Lei around 2696 BC. Lei, also known as Shi Lingxi, was a legendary Chinese empress and wife of the Yellow Emperor. According to tradition, she discovered sericulture and invented the silkworm in the 27th century BC. She was the first person to introduce silk after discovered silkworms while having an afternoon tea. Silk cloth was extremely valuable in ancient China. Wearing a silk was an important status symbol. At first, only members of the royal family were allowed to wear silk. Later, silk clothing was restricted to only the noble class. Merchants and peasants were not allowed to wear silk. Silk was even used for money during some ancient Chinese dynasties. The price for this fabric is very high, and the process of making silk remains a secret. Anyone who dares to tell about it, they will be punished by death. They managed to keep it hidden for 1,000 years. However, in 550 AD, the secret of silk became known to other countries. Silk was such an important product from China that the trade route from Europe to China became known as the Silk Road. The Silk Road was a trade route that went from China to Eastern Europe. Although there was some trade between China and the rest of the world for some time, the silk trade was significantly expanded and promoted by the Han Dynasty, which ruled 206 BC to 220 AD. Silk was used for other purposes besides clothing, such as paper, fishing lines, bowstrings, and canvas for painting.
Silk is an animal fiber produced by asserting insects and arachnids as building materials for cocoons and webs, some of which can be used to make fine fabrics. The origin of silk production and weaving is ancient and clouded in legend. The industry undoubtedly began in China, where, according to the native record, it existed from some time before the middle of the 3rd millennium BCE. The weaving of damask probably existed in the Shang Dynasty and the tombs of the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE at Mashan near Jiangling, excavated 1982. They have provided outstanding samples of brocade, gauze, and embroidery with pictorial design, as well as the first complete garments. The main Song Dynasty achievement in silk production was the perfecting of kasi. And kasi is an extremely fine silk tapestry woven on a small loom with a needle as a shuttle. The technique appears to have been invented by the Sogdians in Central Asia, and it was improved by Uyghurs and adopted by the Chinese in the 11th century. The term kesi, K-E-S-I, literally cut silk, derives from the vertical gaps between areas of colors caused by the weft threads not running across the weave. It has also been suggested that the word is a corruption of the Persian kas or Arabic kas. Kesi was used for robes, silks, panels, and scroll covers, and for translating paintings into tapestry. In the Yuan dynasty, panels of kesi were exported to Europe, where they incorporated into cathedral vestments. Silk weaving became a major industry of one of the China's exports in Han Dynasty.
The performing arts from China ranges from martial arts like Kung Fu to folk songs and dances that is based on different regions and areas in China. Ang ginagawa nila, kumukuha sila ng elements that represents different tribes, combine it, and create a harmonious performance. If ever na makapanood tayo ng latest performing arts from China like singing, dancing, or acting, it might seem weird or old dahil consistent ang mga Chinese sa pagpapakita ng culture nila. Nire-retain nila yung mga different elements na nakuha nila from different tribes na nag-resemble sa mga folk songs nila. At para hindi masyadong mabore yung mga audiences nila, lalo na yung mga kabataan, nilalagyan nila ito ng different accompaniment of modern instruments.
We will tackle about China performing arts. So among the arts in China is the performing arts. So there are a lot of China performing arts, which is, for example, the Chinese Kung Fu, Chinese acrobatics, Beijing opera, the Chinese folk dances, Chinese shadow plays, Chinese puppet plays, Chinese classical instruments, etc. So I'll give 3 examples in performing arts in China. So example number 1 is the Chinese New Year Dragon Dance. So, the dragon dance and the lion dance have been indispensable to Chinese festival since ancient times. With the spread of Chinese people and culture all over the world, the dragon dance has been brought to every corner of the world. Where there are overseas Chinese gathered, it has become a symbol of Chinese culture. So what does a dragon symbolize? Dragon is a symbol of China and is an important part of Chinese culture. Chinese dragons symbolize wisdom, power, and wealth, and they are believed to bring good luck to people. So, the dragon costume used for a dragon dance is made of materials like grass, bamboo, paper, and cloth. So, next is the Chinese Kung Fu. Chinese Kung Fu, also known as Wushu or Chinese martial arts, is an important part of traditional Chinese culture. It is probably one of the earliest and longest lasting sports, which utilizes both brawn and brain. Different from self-defense and boxing, Kung Fu is more holistic, developing internal discipline with external technique. So, there are top 3 Kung Fu styles, which is number 1, the Tai Chi Chuan, as you pronounce. So, it's a Taoist internal martial art. One account of the history of Tai Chi Chuan credits its development to the Taoist immortal Chang Sang Feng, who is said to have drawn the inspiration for the art by watching a fight between a snake and an aggressive eagle. Next is the Qigong. Literally, breath exercise is an invaluable component of traditional Chinese medicine that has its origin in ancient times. Its primary stimulus was the search for longevity with the ultimate aim of immortality. Next is the Shaolin Kung Fu. Shaolin Kung Fu is well known in China and abroad. The original purpose of Shaolin shadow boxing was keeping health, treating illness, protecting famous mountains, safeguarding ancient temples, self-defense, and repelling enemies. Next example of performing arts in China is the Chinese musical instruments. Among the many traditional musical instruments in China, the most popular nowadays include the stringed instruments called the erhu, pipa, and guzheng, and the dizzy flutes. So, the erhu or urhu in Mandarin, it is a 2-string violin-like instrument that is played with a bow, like a violin bow. It isn't as loud a violin because the sound box is small. The sound box traditionally has a snakeskin cover, but modern instruments are made with modern materials. Next is the guzheng. It is a large 1823 or more string instrument. It is said that it is an ancestor of the Japanese koto. Next is the pipa. It is a 4-string Chinese musical instrument. The instrument has a beard-shaped wooden body. So that is the 3 examples of Chinese performance.
Chinese architecture demonstrates an architectural style that developed over millennia in China, before spreading out to influence architecture throughout East Asia. Since the solidification of the style in the early imperial period, the structural principles of Chinese architecture have remained largely unchanged, the main changes being only the decorative details. Mula noong nagsimula ang Tang Dynasty, Chinese architecture has had a major influence on the architectural styles of Japan, Korea, Mongolia, and Vietnam, and a varying amount of influence on the architectural styles of Southeast and South Asia, including Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, and our very own country, the Philippines.
History of Chinese architecture. Bago napunta ang China sa mga building or skyscraper sa panahon ngayon, ang Chinese architecture ay nag-evolve over a long period of time. Nagsimula ito sa Neolithic period na kung saan from pre-1600 BC ang final division ng Stone Age Dito na-provide yung mga makuunang example ng early architecture sa China. Ang kanilang village ay mayroong conical roof at pyramidal roof na napapalibutan ito ng isang deeply dug moat. Ang kanilang mga ceramics din ay highly developed kumpara sa mga ibang countries noon. Sumunod dito ang the Shang Dynasty from 1600 to 1046 BC. Ang Shang Dynasty ang pinakaunang dynasty na nagkaroon ng written records. Beside that, yung kanilang building ay dito na nagsimula ang traditional Chinese style na building, na kung saan nagkaroon sila ng rectilineal buildings na naset up sa isang ground earth foundation and massive earthen walls surrounding the centers. Sumunod dito yung the Zhou Dynasty from 1046 to 256 BC. Dito na nag-appear yung mga architectural forms nila, mga mourning halls, tombs, and altars. Naging ordinaryo na ito sa kanilang buhay. And of course, dito nagsimula yung pagpapatayo ng isang defensive walls or long defensive walls. Dito sikat ang sinasabi nating the Great Wall of China. Ang kanilang mga architectural structures ay na-apply na nila ang pictorial bronze. And sa kanilang mga materials, dito na nagsimula yung creation ng bricks and roof tiles. Sumunod dito yung the Qin and Han Dynasty from 221 BC to 220 AD. Dito nagsimula yung technique ng timber building at na-perfect na nila itong technique na ito. Ang kanilang mga builders rin ay na-master na nila yung firing tiles na kung saan ito'y nabubuo gamit ang mga bato. And dito sikat yung sinasabi nating terracotta army from Xi'an. And yung kanilang breakthrough dito ay nai-apply na nila sa kanilang mga building, ang mga painting, silks, and ceramics. Sumunod dito yung the Three Kingdom period and the Sixth Dynasty from year 220 to 589. Sa period na ito, dito na sila nagkaroon ng religious building, especially Buddhist temples and monasteries. Sumunod naman ang the Sui and Tang Dynasty from year 581 to 907. Dito yung golden age ng China, yung history ng China, na kung saan mas naging popular yung application ng bricks. At dito sumikat o dito na ipatayo yung sinasabi nating Grand Canal. Sumunod naman yung the Song and Yuan Dynasty from year 960 to 1368. Itong ancient architecture nito ay importante kasi dito ay maganda at mayaman ang kanilang diversity at naging open sila sa mga ibang religions. Dito na ipatayo yung mga Tibetan Buddhist temple at mga Islamic mosques. And sumunod dito yung the Ming and the Qing Dynasty from year 1368 to 1912. Dito, yung ancient architecture ay na-reach na nila yung pinaka-highest or yung pinaka-maganda or yung sinasabi nating zenith sa China. And yung production ng bricks ay mas tumaas. Yung quality ng bricks at yung quantity ng glaze tiles ay mas umangat kaysa sa mga nakaraang mga dynasty. At dito na sila nagkaroon ng official buildings at na-standardize na nila ito. And iyon po ang history ng Chinese architecture.
Features of Chinese architecture. Chinese architecture is typified by various features, such as bilateral symmetry or the balance of the design. Use of enclosed open spaces, which is the use of courtyard, a common feature of Chinese architecture. The incorporation of ideas related to feng shui, such as directional hierarchies, a horizontal emphasis or the buildings that were too high and large, and the allusion to various cosmological, mythological, or other symbolism to organize construction and layout from common residences to imperial and religious structure.